Lepo pozdravljeni. Moje ime je Tjaši Artnik Knibbe Sarabraj, sem avtorica knjige Ranljiva in danes v vlogi spraševalke. Z založbo Primus smo se odločili, da bomo za bralce naredili malce mostov med knjigami, med pisci knjig in med vami bralci. Velikokrat se namreč zgodi, da beremo knjige in ne vemo točno, kdo je na drugi strani. Danes mi je v neizmerno veselje imeti prvo gostjo in to je Terri Cole, ki je napisala krasno knjigo Mojstrica mej, moram je tako postaviti. To je v slovenščini, predstavljam si, da Terri ne razume ravno najbolj slovenščino in se zdaj zdi strašno zabavno, kako to vse skupaj zveni v našem jeziku. Takole, Terri je licencirana psihoterapevtka, sočasno je tudi strokovnjakinja za opolnomočenje. Najdete jo, njeno delo, na fantastičnem YouTube kanalu Terri Cole. Svetujem, da greste pogledati, ker so bolj zelo, zelo zanimivi načini, kako vas motivirati in vam poglabljati to temo, istočasno pa tudi, kako vas opolnomočiti. In jaz bom kar začela. Dear Terri, welcome.
Why, thank you for having me.
I'm very, very pleased that you had time to respond to this invitation. And we're going to start actually, let's go in action. Time is gold. So my first question is, let's say, how to recognize when our boundaries are actually being violated, and when that happens, what to do next?
All right. What I would like to do, if it's okay with you, is first let's establish what boundaries are, because what I find is that people are confused about what they are, and that it doesn't mean the same for everyone, you know? So I like to have you think about your boundaries as your own personal rules of engagement. Right? This lets other people know what's okay with you and what is not okay with you. According to me, and the way that I teach it in the book and in my courses, is that your boundaries are made up of your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers, like your non-negotiables in your relationship. So not all boundaries are created equal, right? Not all boundary requests are created equal. And it's not enough to just know them, your preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers. You have to know them and then be able to communicate them, which I think that really becomes one of the biggest challenges for people who are always asking me, like, how do I say it? What do I say? What are the words? Which is why in the book I include one whole chapter is just scripts to help people with that. So back to your question, how can someone tell if a boundary has been violated? And then what do you do if it is? So right here, we have to dial into our bodies, because when you could think about the last incident where you felt like a boundary was crossed. Something happened, even if you didn't say anything, something happened. Maybe you had a tightness in your chest or your throat. Maybe your face got red. Maybe you started to sweat. Maybe you felt a flash of anger, but you didn't say anything. So we always know. It's just a matter of not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say. But if you really think about it, even if you only recognize it after the fact, you know, somebody crosses the boundary and there's a part of you that thinks back and goes, oh, I cannot believe he said that in the meeting, or she said that in the meeting. I'm so mad, right? Maybe at the time you didn't know how to say anything. So identifying it. And another thing I have people do, which is a very effective way of identifying where a boundary has been crossed, where you might need a boundary, or where a boundary needs to be reestablished, is to take a quick resentment inventory. So where you're feeling resentful of other people or their situations, it could even be like work stuff, usually it means some need is going unmet in you. There's a need that is not getting met. So it could be that you have someone who's a boundary bully in your life who's trampling all over your boundaries, but maybe you haven't said anything yet. So it really could be that you need to establish a boundary, or you need to reestablish a boundary. So that's how you know, is how you physically feel, and doing a resentment inventory. Well, that can act sort of as a GPS to go, what relationships or what situations need my attention? Now the question is, what do you do? So once you find those situations, you go, okay, so I feel resentment towards my sister. when I'm thinking of the most recent things I'm resentful of, I'm thinking about her. Now, what do I do? And maybe you know that your sister is really defensive, or maybe your sister has an anger issue, or maybe you're just afraid to be rejected. Like so many, when we think about what are the things that get in our way of setting boundaries, especially with people that we're close to. And so much of the time, it's fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear that they're going to be angry, right? That's what we don't want. So I want everybody listening or watching this to think about your boundaries and becoming fluent in boundaries the same way that you would become fluent in a foreign language, because it really is the same thing. So don't feel bad. Like if you're like, oh, I'm so bad at that, or I'm never good, or I'm such a pushover. Nobody taught you. So you can't possibly know what nobody taught you. But the amazing news is that you can learn. And I wrote a whole freaking book about it. So you could learn and, literally become fluent. So long way around the barn, as we would say, to get back to your question, which is, what do we do? Well, the first thing we do, I have like a 4-step plan of how to set boundaries. But the first thing is you have to identify what is the injury, what needs the boundary, what is the resentment about, what needs your attention, what boundary request do you need to make? Then we have to think about who is the person you're talking to. Now, of course, we can only do a proactive plan with someone we already know, with a situation that we're aware of, basically, not something that happens on the street. You know what I mean? So you think about the person. So let's say it's your sister and you're going to talk to her. Maybe your sister is not a morning person. So then you wouldn't make a plan to have this boundary conversation at 6 a.m. because that would be setting yourself up to fail. Because we know the players in our life. We know. You know who your sister is. Think of everybody watching, listening, bring to mind who is the first person on your resentment inventory list. You know that person. You know the way they are. So, and especially if it's someone that we care about, you can always approach it with love. You can always approach it with kindness, right? Just making a boundary request is not doing anything bad to anyone else. It's really us taking care of ourselves, which is our job. And we're literally the only one who can do it. So it's very important to know that, because I've seen I've been a therapist for 27 years, and I've seen in this practice, people, so much of the time they're afraid people are going to think they're selfish. I don't want them to think I'm mean, right? I don't want them to be mad at me. Like I hear all the things over and over again, sort of the same things. So if you're feeling that way, it's completely normal, but know that you can start with sweetness, right? So you can, if I were talking to my sister, I would say, I give this example in the book, that my sister had a key to my New York apartment. We both lived in New York City. And she was going into my apartment when I wasn't there without telling me and borrowing clothes. Now, we used to share clothes all the time. We lived close by. I would not have a problem with her doing that. I just want her to tell me and ask me, because she would take things that I needed or I didn't know she was taking. And then I'd be looking to go on a flight, looking for my little wrap that I wear on the plane, but it's not there because she has it at her place. So that's an example of something. So let's just say I was going to confront my sister. I would choose a time when we're already going out to dinner to have the conversation. And I would start with sweetness myself. I would say, I love that we can share clothes. I love that we have a similar taste. It's like having double the wardrobe. It's amazing. And I need you to talk to me before you take stuff out of the apartment without asking. You have a key. I was looking for something and you just told me today that you have it at your place. I didn't know you borrowed it, and it's frustrating to me. So I'm making a simple request that you please ask me before you borrow clothes. That's it, right? Now, if your sister's normal, she'll say, okay, I didn't realize it was bothering you. Fine. Or if you're, or she might get defensive and think that you're being critical of her. And she might say, you don't have to ask me to borrow my clothes. I don't care if you just come and take my stuff. Why are you being such a pain? Why are you so high maintenance? Why are you so extra? Maybe. no matter what the response is, it's your right to draw the boundary that you want to draw. And you can respond any which way. I say, hey, I'm not mad. I'm asking for this consideration from you because I don't, I was looking for something and it was frustrating. And actually with my sister in the beginning, she agreed to not just take stuff without telling me. And then she continued to do it and would be like, I forgot or whatever. And I remember saying to her, now you reach a point after you have considered the boundary, considered the person, you've written the script, right? So you need to write the script of what you're going to say before you say it. And then you're going to practice the script in a mirror or with a friend, because you kind of have to get those words in your body, because it's easy to think you're going to do it. But if you don't do it like a practice run, you may not do it. And you may not also expect, like, you can have unexpected feelings come up when you start to assert boundaries. Like you may just spontaneously get emotional and that, right. And then it makes it hard to talk and it makes you feel weird and you're like, ah. And then I ask you to visualize it going well. And when I say going well, I don't necessarily mean the other person agreeing with everything you've said. Going well to me means that you do it. That's all, because the win is in the asking. The win is in the asserting yourself. That is the win. And from a psychological point of view, that is the win. Because what are you doing when you assert yourself in your relationship? You are telling the universe and the other person and yourself how I feel, what I think, what I want matters. That's what you're saying. And when you start setting boundaries with people, even if they resist, even if they're mad, even if they don't do the thing, you will still get the benefit of having better self-esteem, having better, like feeling more self-worth. Because what you're saying is, how I feel matters. Even if my sister were to be defensive, and she was in the beginning, but I stood firm because I knew that how I felt mattered and that what I was asking was 100% reasonable. It wasn't even a lot to ask. What ended up happening though, and this is the next step that we take. If you have, so we have boundary first timers, which are the people that maybe you've thought it, but you've never said it. So we can't, even if you say, oh, Betty at my office is such a boundary bully, blah, blah, blah. If you have never talked to her, if you have never asserted your boundary, she may or may not be a boundary bully, but all we know is that you haven't even given her a chance by setting that boundary. So you're with someone who I've set the boundary with my sister and then she continued to step over it. We call that a repeat offender, or I call that. So it's someone who you have asserted your boundary with and they continue to do it. Then we must attach a consequence to not doing it, right? So with my sister, I've had another dinner with her and I said, hey, this is the third time I've talked to you about taking stuff out of my apartment without asking. And as much as it pains me, if it happens again, I'm taking back your key. And then you can borrow clothes from me when I'm home. So it isn't like I was never going to lend her clothes anymore. But like that felt punitive, but I had to do it because she continued to step over the line that I had written, the line that I had put down. And then after that, it never happened again. And I didn't have to take the key back. And she got it where I was being honest and being like, hey, it's kind of hurting my feelings that you can't remember to do this. It's kind of weird. And I will take the key back if I have to, which I didn't. So if your situation, anyone listening, watching, is that where you have a repeat offender, you have to come up with a consequence that makes sense. Because sadly, the truth about human nature is that it really is pain is one of our most motivating forces. And my sister wouldn't want to be cut out of my closet, right? That would be a little painful for her. Not like extreme pain, not like ridiculous pain, but an inconvenience, let's just call it. And when we change something, the other person is going to notice. And that's what setting a consequence is, letting them know that there is a cost for their continuing that behavior that you've requested that they stop.
Let's say when you mentioned, I find it really fascinating that, the reaction of the body, that's why actually even I reacted to that one, being a mindfulness teacher and a soma yoga teacher, it's, all about being aware of reactions in the body. And even, let's say I call myself many times as an, retired carpet, because in the past, it was all about saying yes to everybody and no way I said no. And I really remember, then later on you go through life and thanks God you understand it. But I remember that physical reaction when I had to say no to someone. Still now I remember, like the whole input in my body, like that feeling of choking and like the whole world is gonna collapse. Eventually I went inward to try to understand, to who I'm actually saying no, because many times, we say no to a person that has nothing to do with the moment, but it's like the no goes all the way back in time. Maybe we can dig now a little bit more in the codependent world, founding, harmonizing, what's actually going on, because the body is telling something that might be a little bit older than the moment in which we are, and many times it's not personal.
Yes. So I call this, a lot of times it's a repeating relationship reality, or a repeating boundary reality, where we are having a transference, which means responding in real time, fueled by an unresolved injury from the past. But something about this situation is familiar. Either the person reminds you of someone, it's like something feels familiar. And so you may be having an amplified response to it because of that. So if this resonates, if you find yourself in any situation, you or anybody listening, there are things that you can do. And I have this little, and I share it in the book and I share it in a lot of my teaching. It's called the 3 Qs for clarity. So it's a tool. I'm going to tell you what the questions are. It's a tool that you can use if you have an experience where you go, wow, I had a really big response to what just happened. This is not to mitigate or nullify what just happened, right? Because 2 things can happen, right? 2 things can be true. Maybe your boss does act like a jerk. Like maybe that's true. But if you have an enormous response to it inside, or you're upset, or you go home and cry about it, or like you're really scared inside, you're like shaking, that is an amplified response. And it would be valuable to figure it out. I'll teach this through a quick story that I had an internship when I was becoming a therapist. And I was in this drug treatment clinic. And the guy who ran it was a very well-known US psychologist, PhD, and he wrote a book about addiction called When Willpower Isn't Enough. He was like fancy. And I was in grad school, right? So I'm there, and I'm going to my therapist and I'm saying, Dr. Washington is such a jerk. He's so cold. He's not even there. He's like there, but he's not even there. He's like, I don't know. I don't know what the big deal is. Like 3 weeks in a row, I'm talking badly about my boss at this place. And she's like, can you describe him again? And I was like, oh yeah, you know the type. 6'2", really good looking. He has dimples. He has a deep voice. He's like a Wall Street Journal reading, golfing on the weekends, martini drinking, like Mad Men, like that type of a guy. And she was like, does that sound like anyone else? And I was like, oh my God, how embarrassing. Like I was already through I was like almost done with grad school to become a therapist. And the realization was, of course, that this guy reminded me so much of my unavailable father, who I was terrified of. So now I'm making this guy wrong. I barely even interacted with him. I didn't even know him. And I would see him coming down the hallway at work, and I would jump into the ladies' room to avoid passing him. You would think I would have questioned, that's not normal behavior, but I really didn't. I really thought it was him. So that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So maybe the guy was a little bit to himself, but the stories I wrote and the experience I had, and the moment my therapist helped me see that I was having a transference to my father, and how, so what we came up with, I came up with these questions to figure it out. And you guys watching and listening, you can use them. So the first question, and if I had had these questions back then, I would have known it immediately. Who does this person remind me of? That's the first question. The second question, where have I felt like this before? Third question, how is this behavioral dynamic, the way we're interacting with each other, how is that familiar with me? And sometimes there's a fourth question that I will throw in if the other three don't illuminate, which is, like, metaphorically speaking, who do I become? And who does the other person become when we're interacting like this? So in that scenario, I became my 10-year-old self, and my boss became my father, my unavailable, emotionally distant, kind of scary father. Now, my therapist says to me, Terri, do you understand why it's important to figure this out? And I was like, well, you can tell me why you think it's important, sure. And she said, how will your boss ever know how smart you are? Don't you want a job at this place when you're done with school? Like, you are not being your best grown-up smart self when you turn into your 10-year-old. This, right, I'm hiding from my boss rather than trying to shine in front of my boss because I was having that experience. And I was like, wow, I wonder where else this happens, not just in my life, but in the life of my therapy clients and lots of people. So I think that going to the, as I like to call it, the scene of the crime, or as you had said at the top of the question, like, historically, this feeling goes back to something else. And so what is the answer here? It is, we must follow the dots back to the original experience, which, if you use these three questions that I gave you, or that fourth one that I added, I guarantee you something will come to your mind where you go, oh my gosh, this person does remind me of that scary teacher, or that scary whoever that maybe it could be a parent, but it could also be, like, there's lots of different people it could be. And this is how it makes it easier for us to eventually draw boundaries when we're not having a transference to the people in our lives, right? When we're actually relating from our grown-up self.
Amazing. Like, I think the story of being self-aware, it fascinates me so much. You can grow up in so many ways, whether it is understanding your past, whether it is understanding your body responses. It's amazing. I think it's giving you such an opportunity. On the other hand, when you start then perceiving reality like these mirrors that we give to each other, there is then really so much even space for gratefulness for things that maybe before we took them right from a victim perspective, and then eventually we start to see life a little bit more as a creator. So I love that one.
It's so true. And part of the, Deepak Chopra talks about becoming the observer without judgment of ourselves. And I always talk about looking at our behaviors and our responses with radical curiosity instead of judgment, because all of the answers we seek are in this information. Like, I always say, like, I don't have your answers, but I am a very good GPS to help you get to where your answers are inside of you, right? Nobody has my answers but me, and the same for you. But there's something about changing the frame with which we view ourselves and the world and us in relationships. It can be so empowering. And as you were saying, and I can feel your excitement, and it resonates with me, this excitement about how empowered we can become of our own volition, our own choice, our own decision. And it really does move us from being in that victim position, because if we just stop at these terrible things happened to me in my childhood, let's say. There's nowhere to go from that place. So what we do is we teach and we learn and we say, yes, terrible things happened, probably to all of us in our childhood. Some kind of something happened to everybody. And I will take that information and I will learn. And I will, in every crappy situation I find myself in, I am willing to dig into that crap stew and pull out this gem of self-wisdom for me. I don't need to make you wrong. I don't need to make them wrong. It's for me that I go, what was my 50% of being in this relationship? Why was that so appealing to me? What was familiar about that person to me? Again, not in a way of blaming, right? I'm not blaming myself and I'm not blaming someone else, because blaming is just a waste of your time and your life. If somebody does something terrible and you don't want them in your life, good for you. Don't have them in your life. Get rid of them. We can learn and we can release ourselves from resentment prison. I never talk about people talk about forgiveness, and I'm really like, no, I do not want to talk about forgiveness because it is fraught with religious implications and other things that if you were a righteous person, then you would forgive, and all this other stuff that I just don't like because I don't think it's true. What I know is true is that when we don't forgive, as Buddha said, some version of this, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. They're not going to. But what are we losing by not? And so what I call it in the way that I teach it is that we have the power to release ourselves from resentment prison, as opposed to forgiving the other person. Because here's the thing. Some people do some things that are truly unforgivable. And we don't need to forgive them. We need to stop letting them take up this valuable real estate in our mind. And when we hold on to these grievances and we relive them and we think about them, we can't stop talking about them, that is our body just releasing cortisol and stress hormones and adrenaline and all of this stuff. As you know, being a somatic teacher, it's so bad. And it's not doing one thing to the person who we're mad at. So I think that so much of therapy work and evolution work and self-help work and all the things that we're talking about, whether it's learning to have better boundaries, being a better communicator, deciding, like really being discerning about who has the privilege of being in your life. Like not everybody should be in the VIP section of your amazing life. Some people need to have general admission seats. Some people shouldn't even be in the venue. They need to just get out. They don't belong there at all. And I think that my clients, a lot of time my therapy clients would feel, and this is where boundaries come in too, that if someone is family, that they have to have this relationship with them. I'm going to say you don't. You can have a more distant relationship with them. You can keep them further away. Because here's the thing. We need to think about who should have the privilege and who is emotionally trustworthy enough to be close to your most tender heart. That is not everybody. And if you have a sibling, a sister, a cousin, a best friend who hurts you, who's mean, who doesn't really want you to win, they're kind of jealous of you. You tell them something good and they put it down. That person should, I promise you, not be in your VIP section. But here's the problem. With your VIP section, you're the only bouncer. You make the guest list. I don't know if this translates to your language. Like, do you understand what I mean?
Completely. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Perfectly.
And if you don't put up the velvet rope, then anybody can come in. And everybody feels entitled to your sunshine, your brains, your time, your energy, your money. And this is where having healthy boundaries, you gain so much bandwidth back for you, for the relationships of the people where it's mutual, for the emotionally trustworthy people, for the people who want you to win, the people in your front row who are cheering you on, who are so happy for you to be happy in life. And I think many of us have very complicated relationships with friends and family. And I'm not saying you need to cut everyone off, but I am saying you need to be discerning about how close people can be to you if you tell them something that's important to you and they throw it up in your face a week later, or use it to embarrass you or mock you or humiliate you. That's our cue to go, they should not know anything important about me because they are not trustworthy. That's it. And you can still be like, see you on Sunday at dinner. Just don't tell them anything important to you.
And when you mention like they, because it seems to me that today, even social media are full of information about this specific kind of people, let's say, who might have a little bit more talent for crossing boundaries. I mean, they call it the cluster B personality, whatever. But let's say, when somebody experiences these sorts of behavior, and let's say that we experience it in our childhood, the fact is that our parts in you who are afraid, that from where it's going to come. And many times, even you immerse yourself in this relationship. So I think it's so important to go on this path of self-individuation, to put yourself who I truly am. But on the other hand, even to understand who these people are, to really have the courage to eat a little bit some bitter apple or bitter fruits or whatever, to feel, I maybe don't want to know this, but I think it's so empowering knowing from where this boundary, let's say, people come who are so easy to set, to cross our boundaries, let's say, who are these people.
In the book, I did a whole chapter on this because this is one of the biggest questions that people have about boundaries. And so it's a whole chapter on what I called boundary destroyers. Mm. So this is different than a boundary bully, right? It's different than a first timer or a repeat offender. A boundary destroyer is someone, and yes, a lot of times, as you said, accurate, they have cluster B personality disorders, from narcissistic personality disorder to histrionic to, there's lots of things that fall under this, mental health challenges, especially if they are going untreated. And really, there really isn't much treatment for narcissistic personality, but there are for other ones. These are people who don't have the capacity to take you in. They don't have a capacity. And that people, especially narcissistic personality, people with narcissistic personality disorder, you're upset and they're crossing your boundary and you're upset about it, is what we call supply. Narcissistic supply. It actually fuels them, which is sad and scary all at the same time. But it's true. And it's something that is important to know, that there will be people who, what I taught in that chapter, I talked about sort of the most common manipulation tactics that this type of personality would use. So it's, from ones that are more common and more commonly known, like love bombing. So love bombing, we talk about, which is the beginning of a relationship where everything is perfect and everyone is perfect and they're doing everything right and saying all the right things to you and buying you gifts and, sweeping you off to weekends in Paris or wherever. But it's sort of, it is a manipulation tactic to hook you. And then once you're hooked, that's like the beginning, and it's like a drug because it feels so good to the person who is the object of the love bomber's desire. And then usually if it is actually love bombing, it will move into the narcissistic cycle of abuse, where it's all you're amazing, you're great, you're amazing, then you're not so great, and now you're horrible and you're discarded, right? And that may be a threat to discard, or it may actually be discarding you, like breaking up or whatever. So we have to look out for these personalities. Another thing that they'll use is, faux concern, like fake concern, where they'll be like, I'm really worried about you. I wasn't going to say anything, but Bob also told me that he's worried about you right now, using like social pressure, exactly, triangulation, making you feel like, oh my God, everyone thinks I'm nuts. So there's that. Then we have gaslighting, which is where they're denying your reality And for those of you, if you don't know, so gaslighting was a term that was originated in the 20s probably, but there was a famous movie in the 40s, original movie. It's been remade multiple times since then. And it's about a husband trying to drive his wife crazy. And it's called gaslighting because the lights in the house, she kept saying, is it getting dark in here? Like, are the lights lower? And he was lowering the lights, but then denying it and saying, no, I don't, are you okay? Like, I don't know. I gotta say, you've been off lately. Something is not right. So it's this very subtle manipulation. And with gaslighting, it can be really big where someone just lies to your face like that guy did. And it can sound like, I never said that. You okay? Like, I never said that. Are you crazy? We never had that conversation, even though you did, So it's, again, what it is though, is it's a power move so that person wants to have more power over you. If you think you're losing your mind, you're going to be more malleable, more manipulatable than you would be otherwise. So for the boundary destroyers, it's something that you really have to look at. And again, like you said before, like, these things can be painful and maybe we don't want to look at them. And yet the reality is that your job is to protect your sovereignty, yourself, your heart, your sense of self, which when we allow these people close to us and they're damaging us and they're making us feel bad about ourselves and they're harming us, whether it's verbally, mind games, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse. I mean, there's lots of extremes, but it has to be your job to value yourself first. I always say this, but it's something that if you can live it, it'll change your life, which is that what you think, how you feel, and what you want has to matter. And it has to matter to you more than what anyone else wants, thinks, or feels. It has to matter to you the most, because when you think about it, how we regard ourselves, our level of self-consideration, of self-love, this sets the bar for every other relationship in our lives. So if you treat yourself like crap, if you don't rest when you're tired, if you talk badly about yourself to others and inside, you will inevitably attract people who agree with that low self-assessment. So if you want to have good boundaries, if you want to have mutual relationships that are not codependent, right, that are actually healthy, it starts with really looking at how you relate to yourself. Stop saying yes to things you don't want to do under the guise of being nice. And listen, we all have relationships. Of course, you're going to still sometimes be compromising in your relationship. You will sometimes be doing crap you don't want to do, because that's called being a human being on planet Earth and living in a society. But I find that with my clients who really struggle with boundaries, a lot of it is people pleasing and needing external validation and being so afraid to disappoint other people that they're endlessly okay with disappointing themselves. I always say that we are all, I don't care what country you live in, most of us as women were raised and praised to be self-abandoning codependents. The more self-sacrificing, the better. But the question is, the better for who? Because it's definitely not better for us, I can tell you that much. So this is your job, right? Your assignment is to treat yourself as well as you treat your best friend or a child that you love, to consider yourself in that same way, because you deserve it. And we need the medicine you have to bring to the world, which if you don't figure this stuff out, you won't ever have the bandwidth to bring it to the world,
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is in the end, such a big gift we've been given, the moment we tap into this true self, authentic self, it's like an endless source of life, of prana, of, creativity. So I think it is so worth it, to go on a pursuit to find this sparkle. And sometimes I think, when I listen myself to people's stories about it, like, it makes in a way sense. Like on the end, once you find your true self, you say, okay, it makes sense. Sometimes, let's say when I thought people maybe betrayed me, and then on the end I realized, oh my goodness, how many times I betrayed my true power. And on the end, I had the biggest resentment in reality towards myself.
Yeah.
Every time, towards myself, how I could be so cruel and so brutal to the life that was given by the universe, God, whatever you believe in, to
Yes.
me. I think that is somehow the should be on the end. I think that flower we nurture and we are going towards to really give it the most possible power to shine.
I 100% agree. And the realizations can be difficult, as you just shared, that throughout, like I really thought in my 20s, like if my boyfriend just wasn't a jerk, it would all be fine. If my boss wasn't an idiot, it would all be fine. If my friend hadn't betrayed me, it would all be fine. Until what I realized through therapy was that I was the common denominator in all of those things. So all of my thinking that Betty was entitled, was Betty entitled? Or was I just serving myself up on a silver platter to do all the things? Was I just saying, I got it and I'm fine and I don't need anything? And then blaming other people for my lack of my ability to allow, to accept, to delegate, to share, to surrender, right? That was a dirty word in my 20s. Surrender, what? I will never surrender. Of course, the meaning of the word now for me has changed. Now it's about surrendering to what is, allowing my good, but you must surrender to the truth of what is. Like we can't do all, as overfunctioners and high functioning codependents, we can't do all the things that we think we can do and do them well and still take care of ourselves. There has got to be an ability to say no to things that don't let you up, that don't nourish you. There's got to be an ability to let relationships go when they've run their course, whether that's friendships, whether that's love relationships, where I feel like many of us, especially high functioning codependents, we just stay at that party too long. We never know when to leave, where we're just in relationships for like years after their expiration date because of fear, because we don't want to hurt anybody. But in the meantime, exactly what you just said, who are we harming by being so afraid to have that one hard conversation that would then liberate us? We're harming ourselves, our potential, our happiness, the future that we want to create. And so I think I want to leave you with the thought. First of all, people can go, if you want to look up your archetype, I have a boundary quiz that's totally free. It's just boundaryquiz.com. Can't mess it up. So there's 13 questions. And there's 7 archetypes. And then once you get your archetype, I send you a video of me explaining, okay, so this is your archetype and this is what you can do to really get on the right path with boundaries. But I think that there's really, like, we have to, in this moment, stop this whole narrative that taking care of ourselves is selfish, that prioritizing how we feel is selfish, because it isn't. And really, if we want the good stuff to give to the world, whether it's through our business or through our writing or through our books or through our practices or our relationships, our families, the only way we will have the real good stuff to give is if we have excellent self-care and self-consideration. And I really think self-consideration is different than self-care, right? Because self-care can look like a manicure and a pedicure, maybe a facial, maybe a bath, maybe working out. But self-consideration is a way of life, where before we commit to a bunch of crap, before we do a bunch of things, we're like, is this going to make me feel the way that I want to feel? Do I have the bandwidth to do this? Could I use help? Do I even want to do this? Allow yourself that inquiry so that when you're saying yes to something, it's an honest yes. And when you're saying no to something, it's an honest no. Because when we say yes, when we want to say no, under the umbrella of being nice, I mean, hello, is that nice? No, that is not nice. That is misleading. We're giving people corrupted data about who we are. And then we wonder why we feel so alone. We have like the existential crisis of like, nobody knows me. Yeah, because you didn't let them know you, and you're worth knowing,
Absolutely. No, I'm enjoying the talk so much, but I know we have minutes, that are ticking in the same time. So maybe for the end, I mean, we went now to so many different parts that I'm now, for the last question, I'm juggling between more of them. But let's say,
That's okay.
yeah, like, which one? Because they're all fantastic. But I know, as I said, you have a very interesting YouTube channel. They can check out more of these topics.
Yeah.
So I'm going to actually let you to decide, it's how you feel, for instance, right now. What are these, last sparkle words that you would like to share with people? Maybe even to give them really the hope it's possible. Because I can imagine when you're in this situation, sometimes you really feel it's coming from left and right, and you feel maybe you lost your body sensations, you parked yourself somewhere outside, maybe your mind is a little bit foggy or whatever. Let's say, to give a little bit the energy boost, like it's possible, some words of hope for the end.
Well, I do think that, I have 600 and something free videos on YouTube, and I have 620 podcast episodes, that there is so much out there for whatever it is that is ailing you specifically. And that even if you don't know anything, if you just feel like you're a disaster, you're a boundary disaster, it's okay. Wherever you are, you're in the exact right place to start now. So forget about what did or didn't happen before. Let's just start here. Just one next right action at a time. And it's through baby steps. And I walk you through them in all of my videos. I give you downloadable guides in almost every video so that you can really dive into your own self. That it's through consistent small steps that true and massive transformation happens. So you can do it even if you're a busy mom. You can do it if you're a busy CEO. Just one next right action at a time. And what I want to say is don't give up, because you're worth it. And really, I said before, but it bears repeating, your specific medicine that you have for the world, listen, you're the only one who has it. Think about your DNA. You are literally the only you that has ever been and that will ever be. So it doesn't matter who else is talking about what you're interested in talking about. They're not you. And we really need you. You're worth it,
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much, Terri. I think we took really a lot today out of this. And I'm sure even the readers of your beautiful book. So now you can see it, in Slovenian.
I love it. It looks great.
Really, please get the book. It's really, I think you're going to learn a lot about it. And I really suggest the whole YouTube story. And I would like to thank even, of course, the Založba, which we say the editorial house Primus, who is actually today the organizer of this story and allowing us actually, right, to make these beautiful, as I said, bridges. I think we need to connect, from south to north, from all languages. And on the end, we all know we are talking one language, I think, and that's trying to talk the language of the heart. So really, from my heart, thank you. And even thank you, Terri, for everything you're doing. Because, sometimes we take it for granted, all the effort you put in your videos, all the material you brought out there. I know it takes time and it takes energy. And thank you in the name of everybody who I'm sure you're helping on the other side. So
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate you.
Bye.
Bye.